Hello, my name is Michael Hubbard, and this is me reading The Groundhog and the Wolf, available on Amazon ebook and paperback. The Groundhog and the Wolf. Once upon a time, there was a groundhog who lived in a hole in a wide empty field. Every day, the groundhog would wake up, sniff the air, look up at the sky, and say, "What a beautiful day to eat some grass." And so he did. There was a wolf who lived at the top of a hill. The wolf watched the groundhog come out of his hole and said, "I think I would like to gobble up that groundhog." So he raced down the hill. The wolf was very fast. As fast as he was, though, the groundhog saw him coming and scurried back into his hole. The wolf sniffed around the hole, which he clearly would not fit in, and said, "I'm going to have to be more clever to catch this groundhog." The next day, the groundhog woke up, looked up at the sky, and said, "What a beautiful day to eat some grass." And so he did. When the wolf saw the groundhog eating, he threw an apple to the far end of the field. When the groundhog turned to look at the sound, the wolf raced down the hill to gobble him up. But the groundhog heard the wolf coming and scurried back into his hole. The wolf said, "I'm going to have to be even more clever to catch this groundhog." He began to think of another way to trick the elusive groundhog. The next day, the groundhog woke up, looked up at the sky, and said, "What a beautiful day to eat some grass." And so he did. When the wolf saw the groundhog come out of his hole, he leapt into a giant balloon, going higher and higher above the groundhog's head. When he got just above the groundhog, he slowly lowered himself down until he was just above the groundhog, ready to snatch him up. Just as the wolf was about to grab him, a bird flew through his balloon, poking a hole in it. Pop! The wolf and the balloon flew off into the distance, with the wolf crying out, "Arr!" The next day, the groundhog woke up, looked up at the sky, and said, "What a beautiful day to eat some grass." And so he did. This day, the moment the groundhog left his hole, a big cage sprung up around the groundhog, and a board dropped down, covering his hole. Outside the cage stood the wolf. The wolf stared at the groundhog, and the groundhog stared at the wolf. Finally, the wolf said, "Now, Mr. Groundhog, I will finally gobble you up." The groundhog sighed and said, "Mr. Wolf, we don't need to be enemies. There are many other things you could eat from the forest. You don't need to gobble me up. Perhaps we could be friends instead." The wolf thought for a moment and said, "No way, Mr. Groundhog. I've worked too hard for this." "Very well, Mr. Wolf," said the groundhog, sighing, "but if you're going to gobble me up, you should probably get me nice and fat first. Go into the forest and gather all the fruits and berries and leaves you can find. Then I'll be a good meal." "An excellent idea, Groundhog," said the wolf. "Now that is an offer I can accept. I will gather these things so you will be nice and plump for my meal." So the wolf raced to the forest as quickly as he could, gathered as many fruits and berries as he could carry. He then ran back to the cage to get the groundhog nice and plump for eating. When the wolf arrived, he gasped. All he saw was one hole inside the cage, one hole outside the cage, but no groundhog. He had dug his way out while the wolf was away and was nowhere to be seen. Having lost his meal again, the wolf was starting to feel desperate. It was getting late, and he was very tired and hungry. He decided to try to sleep for the night, but he couldn't help but think maybe he just wasn't meant to get this groundhog, and perhaps he should move on. When the wolf woke up, he didn't feel quite like himself. His hunger was unbearable as he hadn't eaten for days. He staggered through the woods looking for some food. He wasn't as mindful as he'd normally be due to his hungry belly, and missed a large trap sitting in the grass. Snap! It caught his paw firmly, and he could not escape. As the groundhog woke up the next morning, he heard a strange sound from the woods. It sounded almost like the whimper of a hurt animal. He decided he would go to investigate and see if he could help. The groundhog peeked around a tree and was surprised to see the wolf, stuck fast and whimpering as he tried to free himself from a trap. He looked like he was hurt, and the groundhog knew what he had to do. He started towards the wolf. The wolf saw the groundhog coming towards him and assumed it was to scold him on being stuck and would leave him to whatever fate was coming. Much to the wolf's surprise, though, the groundhog said nothing but began to gently start helping the wolf free himself from the trap. The groundhog pulled and pulled with all his might, and finally the wolf's paw popped free. Both the wolf and the groundhog sighed in relief. Once the wolf was free, though, the groundhog had to wonder, what would happen now? The groundhog nervously clicked his claws together as the wolf slowly approached, staring at him. There was nowhere to run, so the groundhog closed his eyes and waited for the wolf to gobble him up. Much to the groundhog's surprise, as the wolf got closer, he could see a tear well up in his eye. The wolf slowly and gently pulled the groundhog in close to him and gave him a big hug. "Thank you, groundhog," said the wolf. "I'm sorry for how I've treated you. I promise to never hunt you again, and I hope someday I can repay you for saving me today." The next day the groundhog woke up, sniffed the air, looked up at the sky, and said, "What a beautiful day to visit my friend Wolf." And so he did. The end. Thank you all for reading along with me. Once again, this is Michael Hubbard reading The Groundhog and the Wolf, available on Amazon and ebook and in paperback. Take care.